Let me ask you something, and really think about it before you answer. Have you ever been in a relationship, friendship, or even a workplace situation where nothing was obviously wrong, yet somehow you were always the one feeling confused? You weren't being shouted at, you weren't being insulted, there was no dramatic explosion, but still, something felt off. You replayed conversations in your head. You wondered if you were being too sensitive. You felt guilty for wanting space and guilty for staying. If that sounds familiar, this video isn't random, because some of the most damaging personality patterns don't show up as chaos. They show up as quiet, emotional erosion. Today we're talking about covert narcissism, a form of narcissistic behavior that hides behind politeness, vulnerability, and emotional neediness. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why smart, empathetic people fall into these dynamics, why they're so hard to leave, and why clarity, not confrontation, is the real way out. Stay with me, because the final sign explains why so many people blame themselves instead of seeing the pattern. Before we go any further, one thing must be clear. This video is for education. This video is not about diagnosing people. It's about recognizing repeating behavioral patterns over time. Anyone can feel insecure, need reassurance, have a bad phase. What separates normal behavior from a destructive pattern is consistency, lack of accountability, emotional impact on others. All examples in this video are fictionalized, everyday scenarios meant for understanding, not accusation. With that foundation set, we can now look at why covert narcissism is so often missed. When people think of narcissists, they imagine someone loud, confident, dominating conversations, and openly obsessed with themselves. That stereotype is real, but incomplete. Covert narcissists crave the same things: admiration, validation, control, emotional power. But instead of demanding it openly, they extract it quietly. They don't overpower you, they entangle you. And because they don't look dangerous, people often turn the blame inward. To understand why that happens, we need to get clear on what covert narcissism actually is. To understand covert narcissism, we need to break a common myth. Narcissism is not just confidence, it's not just self-focus, and it's not just ego. At its core, narcissism is about regulating self-worth through other people. Overt narcissists do this loudly. Covert narcissists do this quietly. They don't say, "Look how great I am." They say, "Why does nobody appreciate me? Why do people always hurt me? Why am I always misunderstood?" Nothing is ever their fault. Bad relationship? Their ex was toxic. Job issue? Their boss hated them. Family problem? Everyone misunderstands them. This creates a subtle emotional contract. You reassure them. You support them. You manage their emotions. Over time, your emotional energy becomes the fuel for their stability. And once you see that structure, the individual signs become much easier to recognize. Covert narcissists often organize their entire identity around being wronged. They always have a story where they tried their best, others failed them, circumstances were unfair. At first, this story triggers empathy, but empathy without accountability turns into a trap. You might meet someone like this at work. They've had multiple jobs and each one ended badly, but somehow it was never their contribution. Or in relationships, every ex was abusive, controlling, or selfish. Their story never evolves. There is no learning, no growth, no reflection. Being the victim protects them from accountability and guarantees a steady stream of sympathy. And once sympathy is established, guilt is never far behind. Sign 2. Indirect guilt and emotional pressure. Covert narcissists rarely ask for attention directly. Direct requests risk rejection. Instead, they rely on implication. They say things like, "I was hoping we'd spend time together, but I understand if you're busy." You weren't asked, but you feel obligated. Over time, this trains you to prioritize their emotions automatically, without discussion. Eventually, guilt arrives before choice. And when guilt becomes routine, reassurance becomes expected. Sign 3. Humility that demands reassurance. Many covert narcissists appear self-critical. They talk down about themselves, their intelligence, appearance, abilities, or worth. They say, "I'm not that smart. I don't deserve recognition. I'm not special." This can look like vulnerability, but there's a pattern beneath it. They don't want agreement, they want correction. If reassurance doesn't come, they withdraw, they sulk, they grow quietly resentful. What looks like humility is actually a request for validation. And when validation becomes the goal, emotional space starts to shrink. Sign 4. The suffering hierarchy. In healthy relationships, emotional space is shared. With a covert narcissist, emotional space is ranked. You might say, "I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately." Instead of empathy, you receive comparison. Their pain becomes bigger, heavier, more complex. Not because they don't care, but because your pain threatens their emotional centrality. Eventually, you stop sharing. And when communication stops, silence takes over. Sign 5. Silence as a control mechanism. When confronted, covert narcissists often don't argue. They disappear. No explanation, no closure, no resolution. That silence creates anxiety, and anxiety creates compliance. You replay conversations. You wonder what you did wrong. You apologize, not because you understand, but because you want connection restored. Silence becomes leverage, and once silence works, empathy becomes selective. Sign 6. Selective sensitivity. Covert narcissists demand extreme care with their emotions, but when the roles reverse, empathy evaporates. If you express hurt, you're accused of misinterpreting. You're told you're too sensitive. You're dismissed. Sensitivity becomes one-sided, and over time, imbalance turns into self-doubt. Signed 7. Subtle gaslighting. This isn't loud denial, it's quiet reframing. They say things like, "You misunderstood. That's not what I meant. You're remembering it wrong." Individually, these statements seem harmless. Repeated over time, they erode trust in your own perception. Eventually, you start borrowing their version of reality. That's where entitlement begins to hide. Sign 8. Invisible entitlement. Covert narcissists expect understanding without explanation, forgiveness without repair, support without reciprocity. They don't ask for special treatment, they assume it, and resentment builds when the world doesn't comply. That resentment often leaks out as criticism. Sign 9. Criticism disguised as care. They frame judgment as protection. "I'm just trying to help. I don't want you to get hurt." But the result is always the same: diminished confidence. Care should strengthen, not shrink. And after enough shrinking, something deeper happens. Sign 10. The self-erosion effect. This is the ultimate sign. After prolonged exposure, you don't feel like yourself anymore. You overthink. You self-censor. You walk on emotional eggshells. You over-explain. You second-guess. You feel responsible for someone else's emotional state. Healthy connections expand identity. Unhealthy ones quietly erase it, which raises the most important question of all: what to do with this knowledge? You don't fix covert narcissism with confrontation. You fix your situation with boundaries, observation, emotional detachment from manipulation. Watch reactions, not promises. Boundaries reveal character. And that awareness leads us to the final reminder. If this video resonated, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're perceptive. Awareness isn't bitterness, it's clarity, and clarity is the beginning of freedom. If you want psychology explained deeply, calmly, and without noise, subscribe. And if someone needs understanding, not confusion, share this. You're not imagining it, you're waking up.